Hello, welcome back to the channel. My name is Lisa Elvin Staltari, and I'm a genealogist and a passionate traveler. Over the last 2 years, I've been featuring each Fille du Roi or King's Daughter and getting to know their stories a little bit better. We are currently doing episode number 190. But before we begin, let me show you ways that you can support the channel. The first 3 keep you in the know. Subscribe, like, and notify. The next are ways in which you can help the channel really grow. We have Coffee and Patreon, which are monthly and one-time only support systems. And we also have a super thanks that YouTube has permitted me to do since I've reached 1,000 subscribers. Thank you so much to all of you. So let's get started and get to know our Fille du Roi of this episode. Episode is episode 190, Elisabeth Blais. She's also known as Isabelle because that was a common, the same name sort of thing back then. This is a viewer request, and when I looked in my files, one of my oldest and dearest friends this was also her great-grandmother. Get started. Beth was born in 1648 in Paris, France, in the parish of Saint-Eustache. Her parents were Claude Blais and Marguerite Verrier. Let's talk a little bit about the church where she would have been baptized. The Church of Saint-Eustache is a church in the first arrondissement of Paris. As you can see, Paris is laid out in circles. The present building that you see there on the top was built between 1532 and 1632. So imagine when Elizabeth was baptized, it was a brand new church. The 2019 Easter Mass that was scheduled at Notre Dame in Paris was relocated to Saint-Eustache after the big fire. Let's talk a little bit about the first arrondissement. The first arrondissement of Paris is one of the most central arrondissements of the historic heart of Paris. You can see how it really is the middle of Paris. It includes in particular one of the oldest districts of the city, the district of Les Halles, which dates from the very beginning of the Middle Ages. So Elisabeth would leave for New France on Le Jean-Baptiste and arrive June 30th, 1669. This was after her father's passing, and she would bring with her a dowry worth of about 200 pounds. The groom that she would select and who would select her was Pierre Roche, which means Pierre Rock, born in 1635 in a commune called Castel-Sarrazin in France. Now let's have a look at where this is. It is found in the region of Occitanie, and it is found in the département of Tarn-et-Garonne. It is the second most populous commune in this section, and you can see where it is when you look at the map on the regions of France. You can see how close to Spain it is. So that gives you an indication of completely, a very different kind of experience he would have had. And the first evidence of this town, it dates from 961. Castel-Sarrazin was built around that period. The early history of this area is really marked by war against the English until the end of the 12th century. Then we have the Crusades from the first part of the 13th, and then another crusade in 1320 that resulted in the deaths of many Jews in the city. The region was again affected by the 100 Years' War and again during the wars of religion of the 16th century. Very, very tough area. And you can see the church that he would have been baptized in, and as it, an illustration of it, and then as it exists today. And this in the bottom is just kind of what it looks like today. Very calm, much different than it would have been during Pierre's time. Another little tidbit of trivia is that this area was the finish of stage 17 in the 2007 Tour de France. So kind of interesting to see that. So Pierre would come to New France. He was by profession a shoemaker. He would marry another Fille du Roi named Marie Lorfillet, and she would pass away. We see her in the 1666 census, but by 1667, Pierre is a widow, and he owns 8 arpents, so that's about 6 acres of land. So he needs to find a wife. So on the 7th of October, 1669, Pierre and our beautiful Elisabeth were married at Ile d'Orléans. So Pierre and Elisabeth would settle in Saint-Famille on the island of Orleans. The Ile d'Orléans, as many of my regular viewers know, is a place we go return to over and over again. It's located on the St. Lawrence River, about 3 miles east of downtown Quebec City. The island was one of the very first parts of the province to be colonized by the French, and a large percentage of French Canadians can trace their ancestry to the early residents of this island. The name Ile d'Orléans was actually given later on in the history of this place. It was known as the Grande Ile, Sainte Marie, Saint Laurent, and I tell you this because as you're doing research, you may see these names bandied about. So I wanted you to know that it did have other names before. It was actually named for Henry II, who was the Duke of Orleans, and he was also the second son of King Francis at the time. And so it was signed, given to him in honor of that. I also want to point out the little picture in the middle of your screen indicates the different sections of Ile d'Orléans. Let's go through them, starting with the tip. We have Saint Petronille, Saint Pierre, Sainte Famille, Saint Francois, Saint Jean, and Saint Laurent. All of these are distinct townships. Think of them as individual towns. They each have their churches. They each have their records. So make sure you know where on the island your family lived. So they would have 4 children in all. We have Pierre, who died in infancy. We have Elisabeth, who lived to be 22. And then we have Marie, who lived to be 18. And we have Philippe, who passed away at the age of 2. So I wanted to share this with you. It was kind of interesting to note. I'm going to read it in French. Dans l'inventaire après son décès, établi par Paul Vachon le 5 avril 1677, il est mentionné qu'il est décédé subitement chez Pierre Martin à Château-Richer. Il y a environ 3 semaines. This is from pdrh.com. Translation. In the inventory after his death, that was done by Paul Vachon on April 5th, 1677, it is noted that he died suddenly at the home of Paul Martin at Château-Richer about 3 weeks ago. So that's how we establish his death, because we do not know. We don't have a death record. And we now know that he probably died of a heart attack. This is very often the case in New France. One man dies and another arrives. Now remember, Elisabeth would have at least 2 children that she would need to take care of. She had 2 children under the age of, 5 at the time of his death. So the second groom, his name was Vincent Guillou. He was born in 1645 in La Rochelle, France, in the parish of Saint Barthélemy. His parents were Nicolas Guillou and Madeleine Jeanne Josselet. Let's talk a little bit about La Rochelle. It was founded during the 10th century and became an important harbor in the 12th. Until the 15th century, La Rochelle was to be the largest French harbor on the Atlantic coast, dealing mainly in wine, salt, and cheese. Obviously good stuff. The name was first recorded in 961 as Rupella, from a Latin diminutive meaning little rock. This town has one of the richest histories of all the towns of France, from its beginnings as an area where the Knights of Templar had their strongest base. Eleanor of Aquitaine, hence Eleanor of Aquitaine, she was in Nouvelle Aquitaine. Henry Plantagenet in 1152, who would become, 2 years later, King Henry II, thus putting La Rochelle under Plantagenet or English rule, until Louis VIII captured it back in the 1224 siege of La Rochelle. During this British or English control of the city, Henry II in 1185 had the Vauclair Castle built, which the remnants of it are still visible in the Place de Verdun. From 1568 on, La Rochelle would become a center for the Huguenots, and it was here in La Rochelle that the Protestant revolts occurred and created the uprising that would become known as the Siege of La Rochelle. Throughout the 1600s, the Huguenots were expelled from La Rochelle and would come to New France and would also emigrate to the Americas, founding different towns, but notably one called New Rochelle. And yes, they were founded by Huguenot refugees. So Vincent would come to New France sometime around 1670, and he would actually get married to a lady named Jeanne Sicard, another fille du roi that we have not yet done. And he would have two living children after her passing, and he brought with him to the marriage. So he was a widower, and he would ultimately marry in 1677 Our Lady of the Hour. So they were married April 28th, 1677, on the island of Orleans, presumably in the same chapel that she had married her first husband in. Would go on to have 7 children together. Barbe would die in infancy. Jean would also die in infancy. Marie-Madeleine would marry Paul Martel de la Montagne and have 11 children, 7 who would make it. We feature Paul's mother in episode 134, Marguerite Lamoureux, who was also a fille du roi. We have Anne, who would marry Guillaume Guérin and have 4 children, all of whom would make it. We have Marguerite, who would marry Paul Vaillancourt and have 7 children, all of whom would make it. We have Geneviève, who would pass away, we think, possibly at the age of 22. And Catherine would marry Antoine Martel de la Montagne and have 11 children, 8 of whom would make it. Antoine's mother was fille du roi Marguerite Lamoureux, who we featured in episode 134, making Antoine and Paul Martel brothers who married 2 sisters. And then we have the 1681 census. We have Vincent and Elisabeth, children. Vincent, that's from his first marriage. Elisabeth and Marie, that's from her first marriage. And then we have Marie-Madeleine, who would be 7 months old. We have 1 gun, we have 5 goats, and 15 arpents, about 12 to 13 acres. So Elisabeth's life would come to a tragic end at the age of 42. Even for those times, this was too young. We do not know what she died of. What we do know is that she spent time in the hospital being treated by these 2 entries in the Register of Patients from Hôtel Dieu. So you can see here, Registre journalier des malades de l'Hôtel Dieu de Québec. I have put the link in for you to have a look. At her death, she would have left 60 descendants by 1729. And she and her second husband, Vincent, would have been married just a mere 15 years. So she really didn't have a lot of time with either husband. So think about Vincent. He had buried 2 wives now, and he had these children to support and to make certain that they survived. So we can thank him for maintaining that family unit as well. He would go on to pass away on the 28th of August, 1716. And he is buried, along with Elisabeth, on the island of Orleans, I believe in the St. Pierre Cemetery. As a final tribute to Elisabeth, she is listed on the monument to the founding families on the island. Pierre Roche, originaire de Saint-Eustache, marié à Elisabeth Blais, and 1663 is when he would have established himself on the island. Here, as always, are some resources I love to share. We have La Société des Filles du Roi, the Quebec Genealogical E-Society. We have the new one, Société d'Histoire des Filles du Roi. Check that one out. Wikitree is always a basic go-to. Généalogie Québec, we need to make certain we look at that. And those of you who aren't subscribed, I would urge you to get a 1-month subscription to just check it out. Nos Origines is a free site. I posted all the links for you to have a look at that and further your research. With that, we end our study of Elisabeth Blais. She would die much too young. But yet, with 60 descendants, and certainly my viewer and my good friend are descendants of this very brave woman who managed to make a mark in the 42 short years that she lived. And she would have, being a widow and remarried, began two families and would be one of the pioneers at Ilolia. And we really need to also acknowledge her second husband Mason for maintaining that family unit. So thank you to both of them and to Pierre as well. And I want to just make sure that we acknowledge her contribution, that we bless her memory, and that we are grateful that she came to our shores. And before I let you go, I want to thank you for watching, and the patrons and supporters are listed there. Thank you so much to all of you for making all this happen. Thank you so much. Until I see you on episode 191, au revoir.